We are starting section 4 of chapter 6, which looks at absolute value. So please write this down in your notebook. So we're going to copy down the title, 6.4 absolute value, and then we're going to write down the definition. So copy this down. The absolute value is the distance between that number and 0 on the number line. Once you've copied that down, look at the drawing on the bottom. You do not need to copy this down. So absolute value is the distance from the point to 0. So if I look at the absolute value of 5, it's the distance from 5. The positive numbers kind of make sense. The negative, though, if I have a negative 4, the absolute value is just the difference from 0, which is 4. So distance is always positive or 0, but you can never have a negative. Therefore, we never have, so there are no negative absolute values. So copy all this down. When you're ready, you can pause. If you need to, you can pause the video. When you're ready, you can move on. If you have a question, write that down on the side. So we're looking at absolute values. So go ahead and copy down example 1, find the absolute values. So I have A, so what is the absolute value of 3? Well, that's 3. What's the absolute value of negative 3? Well, again, we just want the distance from 0, so that's 3 units from 0, so it's positive 3. What is the absolute value of negative 2.5? Well, it's positive 2.5 because that's how many units it is away from 0. Oops, we have negative 3 again. Let's make that negative 8. So the absolute value of negative 8 is 8. So notice all of our absolute values are positive numbers. So again, if you need some more examples, you can also look in your textbook to find some more examples of absolute values. So you can also look on page 270. So the examples in your book are different from my examples if you need another reference. Okay, so now you're going to do quite a few on your own. So write this down in your notebook. So you might want to pause the video. And then when you're ready, you're going to enter your answers into the text box on the right so that I can see your answers. You can also type in a question there. If you have a question, you can say, Mrs. Miller, I don't understand what the absolute value of such and such would be. That way, when I look that over, I know what we need to cover tomorrow when we come back into class. So again, take your time, write this in your notebook, and then transfer your answers into the text box on the right. Now we're going to write down example number 2, so please write this down in your notebook. So example 2, we're going to compare the values. So I want to compare, so you might want to copy all this down, pause the video, copy this down. When you're ready to listen, then go ahead and hit play. So we want to compare these, and we're going to compare them again using the less than and greater than signs that we have been using. So I want to compare the absolute value of negative 10 and 4. Well, the absolute value of negative 10 is 10. 4 is 4, so 10 is greater than 4. Here I want to compare 10 and 4. Well, we know the absolute value of 10 is 10, and the absolute value of 4 is 4, so we're going to have the same answer. Now, I've kind of tricked you here. So notice the negative signs are on the outside. So let's first take the absolute value. So let's first look at just the absolute values of these two. So I still have the absolute value of 10 is 10. The absolute value of 4 is 4. But the negative just hangs out on the outside, so I'm just going to put them back on the outside. Now I want to compare what's bigger, negative 10 or negative 4. And we know that negative 4 is bigger because if I draw my number line and I have 0 and I have negative 10, negative 4 is more to the right, therefore it's a larger number. So make sure you notice that the negatives are on the outside of the text box, or of the absolute value signs. So now you have some on your own. So again, you're going to use the less than and greater than signs to compare these. So copy this down into your notebook, write your answers in your notebook, and then transfer your answers to the text box on the right. Again, if you have a question, go ahead and write that question in the text box because I'll see it along with your answers. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. If you need to rewind and listen to something again, go ahead and rewind and listen to that again. Okay, copy down example 3, a word problem. So you don't need to copy this all down. Copy down all the words and even just make a quick little drawing showing what's happening. So we want to know which is closer to the surface of the water. It doesn't matter if they're above or below the water. So we have a bird at 10 feet above. So here's our bird. It's at 10 feet above. And then we have our fish that's 9 feet below. So if we look at the absolute value of each, so what's the absolute value of 10 is 10. Absolute value of negative 9 is 9. So which is closer to the surface, though? We're not comparing which is greater than, which is less than. We want to know which is closer to the surface. And that would be the 9 is closer to the surface. So our fish is closer to the surface. So again, if you need to rewind, you can rewind. If you need another similar example, you can look at page 271 in your textbook for a very similar question to help you understand this. When you're ready to move on, go ahead and hit play. If you need to pause, go ahead and hit pause. Now you're going to do one on your own. So this is actually question number 11. So you're going to copy this down into your notebook. Again, make a quick little sketch, right? So you could just do a bird. You could do the water surface. You could do a fish. It's got to be a happy fish. So a seagull is 56 feet above the surface. So your fish is at 56 feet above. And, oopsie, we want a shrimp. I made a fish. So your shrimp or your fish is 56 feet below the surface. Now let's look which one is closer to the surface. So write this down in your notebook. If you need to pause the video, go ahead and pause the video and write your answer into the text box on the right. Again, if you have a question, you can write that in the text box. You can write a note to yourself on the side of your notes so that you can ask that question tomorrow during class. So write this in your notebook. This is just a little review. So absolute value looks at the distance that the number is from 0. So if you want to, you can draw your number lines. So if I have a -3 and a +4, I want to know the distance from 0. So a -3 is 3 units from 0, and a +4 is 4 units from 0. And how can you have a negative value? The only way I could get a negative value is if my negative sign is on the outside of my absolute value, so this would be a -3. But an absolute value can only be a positive number. Okay, my last slide. Do you have any questions? Do you wonder anything? If this, then that. So you could even write down some examples of what would this equal if you're not understanding absolute values. If you understand everything, just say I have no questions so that I see that in the text box on the right. And I'll see you tomorrow during class.